Hello, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Russo, and my partner is,
Craig Roberts.
and we're doing a presentation on IT insider attacks, detection and prevention. So, the outline of our presentation is part one is the introduction, where we'll be talking about definitions and types of attacks. Part two will be detection, which will include things like indicators, common detection methods, and automated approaches. Part three is prevention, which is creating a prevention program, authentication, and access control. And part four will be us summarizing the project.
All right, so to start, uh, we should probably go through a couple definitions. So, first of all, an insider is someone who has authorized access to the system. So, some examples of an insider could be employees, contractors, or business partners. And for employees, it could be both former or current employees. So then a malicious insider is somebody who wishes to use this authorized access maliciously to harm the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of the system. An insider attack is the realization of a malicious insider's goal to harm the CIA of the system. And some statistics on insider attacks are that they amount to 28% of data breaches, and they also amount to around 50% of monetary damage done to organizations. So we just included a graph here to show that the average cost of insider attacks is rising. So organizations are dealing with losses in the millions of dollars due to insider attacks. For the types of insider attacks, we included three of the most common types. The first is data leaking, which is the release of system data. This, of course, damages the confidentiality of the system's data. And then there's data sabotage, which is unauthorized modification or deletion of system data, and this damages the integrity of the data. And then the third type of attack is sort of like a subtype, and it is blackmail. So basically, this is when an insider is being influenced or threatened by an outsider to commit an insider attack. And this usually leads to other types of attacks, such as data leaking or sabotage. So for detection, one of the most important components of insider attack detection are indicators. And what an indicator is a sign of a potential malicious insider. So these are things that you can look out for employees or just insiders in general for just signs that could lead to them potentially being a malicious insider. So part of this are social behaviors to look out for. So for example, if an employee is disgruntled or if they're disregarding rules or they're not engaged with their work or other coworkers, these are examples of social behavioral indicators. And then indicators can also be technical actions, such as logging into a coworker's workstation. Um, this is very important because around 80% of insider attacks are premeditated. So this planning period allows for a window of time where potential attackers can be spotted. So, for some common detection methods, the first one we have is attack trees, and we learned about this in one of our assignments in class. But an attack tree is basically outlining the potential methods to carry out an attack. One important component of attack trees is the critical step, which is a node that must be visited in order to carry out an attack. So, for the detection of insider attacks, this is really important because we can use the knowledge of critical steps, and organizations can decide to spend most of their security resources at these critical steps, and this would allow for higher defense and detection rate against the insider attacks. And then another common detection method would be honeypots, which these are system resources that are made to appear valuable, but they really aren't all that valuable to the organization. It's a common method used to attract and trap attackers. I think this is more widely used for external threats, but the same idea can be applied to malicious insiders as well. If you deploy a honeypot within the system, it can be used to detect malicious insiders. And finally, we have a couple automated approaches. So the first one is making use of the indicators that we talked about earlier uh, by modeling human behavior. So the first step of this approach is management has to record the indicators exhibited by each insider. So basically, if you notice any weird social behaviors or anything for an employee, uh, you would have to make a record of that. And next, the system could use numerical values and formulas in order to detect insider attacks. The first value is the weights, and a weight value for an indicator is basically how likely it is for that indicator to point to an attack. And the threshold is a total value in general that represents the minimum sum of weights required for the system to signal a potential insider attack. So basically, if a insider or employee has been noted to exhibit many indicators and all these indicators have high weights, if you sum up the weights of all the indicators and it is higher than the threshold, then the system will flag them as a malicious insider. And here we just have some sample indicators and weights to better illustrate how this works. So you can see at the top here, a disgruntled employee has a weight of zero point 0.4, which is relatively high. So this is one of the largest signs that may point to malicious insider. And then non-engagement and disregards rules are also they also have high weights, so they are also more likely to point to insider attacks. And for the final automated approach, we have the analysis of system performance. This approach is used specifically for the detection of data sabotage by detecting unexpected file modifications. The way this system works is that it basically continuously monitors the CPU usage of the system. If the system detects high CPU usage at an unexpected time, then this could mean a potential insider attack. And we just have a graph below here to show the effect of large file modifications on CPU usage. So here you can see at around 25 seconds on the graph, CPU usage spikes, and this would be an indication to the system that there may be an unexpected file modification, meaning a potential insider attack.
So one of the most important things about dealing with insiders is creating a prevention program. Uh, Here we have 10 steps that would help build this prevention program. The number one step is probably the most important, which is finding which piece of information your company holds that is worth the most. All data is important, but whatever your company is based around, that should be your main concern of protecting. Part two is learning from past attacks. There's no better way to create a prevention program than seeing how other people have failed in the past in order to deal with their weaknesses. Three is deal with business partner threats. So making sure that when you're dealing work with business partners, that you keep them on a shorter leash than you would employees, as they are the more likely people to steal your data. Number four is you should monitor employee behavior. As Craig mentioned earlier, indicators are a key way to know that an insider attack is about to happen. Number five is to teach employees about the risks of recruiters. You know, teaching employees about different things helps prevent any form of insider attack because most of them come from a lack of knowledge. Number six would be careful of resignations and terminations. Most insider attacks happen within 30 days before or after an employee joins or leaves a company. Um, Number seven is apply security infrastructure for outside threats to internal ones. Uh, so this is to apply some of the large amounts of security protocols you have for foreign threats for internal threats. Eight would be keep up to date with employees' privacy issues. So this is knowing that something happened in your employee's life that might have a impact on them performance wise, and that sometimes it's better to give an employee vacation time than having them stay on extra shifts and might push them over the edge. Uh, Number nine is keeping all teams on the same page. Large organizations have many different departments, developers, HR, sales, and one way to prevent insider attacks is to make sure that everyone knows what's happening everywhere else in the company. This doesn't mean share data from the company, like system data, but make sure that everyone is aware of training and how to prevent attacks. And number 10 is to develop a prevention program as soon as possible. The next thing we want to talk about is authentication. Authentication is key to preventing insider attacks. This allows for you to do tracebacks on the attackers, as there are multi-factor authentication, and this will help deter attackers from committing the attacks. There are 4 types of authentications: what you know, what you have, what you are, and where you are. Where you are is a proposed new one, which verifies the location of the user and can detect hackable workstations. The last one is access control. So there are different types of access control. A common one is least privilege, which limits the access to the minimum amount of required. Sorry, least privilege, which limits the access to system data for only what is required. And this reduces avenues for potential attacks. There's also job rotation, which means that employees will periodically switch jobs within the organization and thus have different data accessible to them at different times. And this helps prevent premeditative attacks. As Craig mentioned earlier, 80% of insider attacks are premeditated. And by rotating the employees often, you can find traces of someone planning an attack or an attack that has already happened. And the last one is insider aware access control. It's an extension to role based access control. Add risk values to permission and roles. It sort of is like that weight graph for the indicators, but more on the data side. So you know which data is more likely to be targeted. You can put that data with more trusted employees versus a new hire, and thus you can know what to look out for and what is more likely to be targeted by an insider. And for the summary, insider attacks are a huge and unique challenge for IT organizations. They require constant observation and careful attention as to prevent insiders. Um, and one of the most important things, not just within IT but in life in general, is that trust is key. You know, you can't be too trusting, otherwise you're just asking for someone to steal your data. But if you don't put any trust on employees, then you're going to run into problems where nothing's going to get done. Each countermeasure that we've talked about in this presentation has its strengths and weaknesses, which we outline in our paper if you want to read it. And by adopting simple guidelines, companies can prevent the loss of data and save money